The 5 historical errors about the feudal system that are still taught over the centuries. Feudalism has become one of the most explored themes in school textbooks, historical debates, and cultural productions. However, despite its importance for understanding the Middle Ages and the formation of Europe, it has also become a breeding ground for misconceptions and ideas perpetuated without critical analysis. Many of these errors arose not only from teaching failures, but from a natural tendency to reduce complex systems into versions that were easier to memorize but deeply inaccurate. The result is that, even today, millions of people view feudalism as a caricature, a world dominated by castles, tyrannical lords, miserable serfs, and an absolute absence of progress. Medieval reality, however, was much more sophisticated, diverse, and dynamic than the popular image usually presents. To understand this distortion, it is necessary to explore 5 of the most widespread historical errors about feudalism. The first major mistake is the idea that feudalism was a universal and uniform system, present throughout Europe. In the same way, in many classrooms, feudalism is presented as if all European countries had followed exactly the same model of social organization. This view ignores that feudalism was not a deliberately created system, such as a law or constitution, but a gradual construction, adapted differently in each region. In France, for example, the feudal structure quickly consolidated, resulting in an intricate network of castles, oaths of vassals, and clearly defined obligations between suzerains and vassals. In England, after the Norman conquest, feudalism took on peculiar characteristics, more centralized and regulated by the king. In Germany, extreme political fragmentation made the system even more decentralized and unstable, while in the Iberian Peninsula feudal practices were mixed with the Reconquista and specific military relations. In regions such as Italy and the south of France, autonomous cities, and wealthy merchants significantly diluted the traditional feudal presence. This shows that feudalism was not a homogeneous structure, but a set of practices shaped by geography, politics, and local culture, which varied enormously from one territory to another. The second widely held error is to believe that feudalism represented an era of absolute stagnation. This view, reinforced by centuries of negative interpretations of the Middle Ages, holds that nothing relevant happened in this period, and that Europe remained frozen in time until the Renaissance. Not only is this notion inaccurate, but it contradicts an immense amount of archaeological discoveries, documentary records, and technical advances that have occurred throughout the medieval centuries. The Middle Ages saw a number of important innovations in agriculture, such as the triennial crop rotation, the wheeled iron plow, and the widespread use of water and windmills. There were also significant advances in medicine, architecture, metallurgy, and trade. Monasteries preserved texts, developed administrative methods, and contributed to the literacy of part of the population. Universities' legal codes, navigation techniques, and embryonic forms of commercial accounting emerged. The view that feudalism blocked progress is the result of modern readings that project current expectations, such as industrialization and modern science, on a period that operated under completely different logics. The third recurring error is to imagine that the medieval serf was equivalent to a slave. Although servile status was marked by rigid obligations and severe limitations on freedom, it was not to be confused with slavery. The serf could not be separated from the land, as his function was linked to local agricultural production. He had rights, such as the use of plots of land for his own sustenance, access to common pastures, and protection from invasions. The feudal lord exercised authority over the work and movement of the serf. but did not possess complete control over his life, as a Roman owner would have over a slave. In addition, the serf could accumulate goods, raise a family, and, in some situations, gain freedom through payments, military service, or migration to cities. These differences do not make serfdom light or fair, but they do reveal that comparing serfs to slaves erases essential nuances of medieval structure. Still, confusion continues to be taught because the analogy seems simpler than explaining the legal and social complexities that define servile dependence. The fourth common error is to claim that all feudal lords acted as absolute tyrants, exploiting serfs without any moral or institutional limit. This idea, reinforced by films, novels, and popular representations, creates the impression that the fief was ruled only by whims and arbitrary. However, the lord's authority was regulated by local customs, customary law, the influence of the church, and social expectations that varied from region to region. Cruel behavior existed thus in any society, but it did not represent the totality of feudal relations. Many lords were required to respect communal traditions, provide military protection, ensure crop stability, and intervene in internal conflicts. The figure of the lord was also subjected to pressure from other nobles, the king, and the ecclesiastical courts. Presenting feudal lords as autocratic monsters reduces a complex system to a sensationalist narrative. Ignoring that, without a modicum of stability and cooperation, a fiefdom simply did not work. Extreme tyranny could lead to revolts, migrations, or economic collapse, something that few masters were willing to risk. The fifth most frequent mistake is to believe that feudalism ended abruptly with the end of the Middle Ages and disappeared altogether. The reality is that feudal structures persisted for a long time, even after the emergence of centralized states, monetary economies, and prosperous cities. In some regions of Eastern Europe, forms of serfdom lasted until the 19th century. In countries such as England and Germany, legal vestiges, economic obligations, and traditions of rural property remained present for centuries. Feudalism did not collapse overnight. It slowly transformed, being absorbed by new political, economic, and social dynamics. Many fundamental concepts were born out of the feudal system: the link between property and power, the division of territorial jurisdiction, the structure of local governance, certain legal traditions, and even the way armies and taxes would be organized in later centuries. Ignoring this historical continuity reinforces the false idea that the transition between eras was abrupt, when in fact it was a long and complex process. These five oft-repeated errors: the supposed uniformity of the system, the idea of stagnation, the confusion between serf and slave, the caricature of the tyrant master, and the notion of an abrupt end obscure the true nature of feudalism. By reducing a multifaceted system to distorted simplifications, one misses the opportunity to understand how it really worked and why it became so enduring. Feudalism was not just a set of rural obligations. It was a form of social organization that shaped identities, legal traditions, economic relations, and forms of power. Beyond the distortions, it represented an attempt to create order in a fragmented world where local security was worth more than any national ideal. Each fiefdom was its own universe where conflicts, alliances, dependencies, pacts, and constant negotiations between different social strata coexisted. Understanding the misconceptions still taught about feudalism is essential to see the Middle Ages more clearly and less prejudiced. Medieval Europe was not a civilization frozen in time, but a living continent full of adaptations, inventions, and changes. History, when analyzed in depth, reveals that large social systems are always more complex than they seem. By dismantling these errors, the way is opened for a more accurate and richer vision, which recognizes both the shadows and the advances that defined one of the longest and most influential periods in European history. And in doing so, we realize that to truly understand feudalism is to understand the very formation of Western society